Picture this. LaGuardia Airport, New York City. The kind of chaos that only happens when 3 delayed flights finally board at once. Gate agents shouting boarding groups. Business travelers pushing past families. The smell of overpriced coffee mixing with industrial carpet cleaner. And in the middle of it all, a young black woman walks toward the jet bridge, her brand new carry-on rolling behind her, first-class boarding pass trembling slightly in her hand. Amora Williams had checked that boarding pass 17 times since leaving her dorm room at 4:30 that morning. Seat 2A. First class. Window seat. The leather seats she'd only glimpsed through curtains on previous flights. This wasn't supposed to be her world, not yet anyway. She was 19, surviving on ramen noodles and campus meal plans, pulling all-nighters in the aviation program library, studying aircraft systems until her eyes burned. But today was different. Today she had a golden ticket, courtesy of a father she barely knew anymore. Richard Williams. That name carried weight in aviation circles, though Amora tried not to think about it too much. When classmates discovered her last name, when professors made the connection, she'd always brush it off. Yeah, same last name, no relation. She'd lie, even though the truth was far more complicated. Her parents had divorced when she was 7. Her mother got custody. Her father got the freedom to build an airline empire. Birthday cards arrived like clockwork, always with checks that felt more like apologies than gifts. And then, 3 days ago, an email, proud of you starting aviation school. Thought you should experience what you're working toward. Dad. The first-class cabin smelled like expensive leather and possibility. Amora found 2A easily enough, second row, left side, right by the window where she could watch the ground crews she'd been studying. She stowed her bag, settled into the seat that felt like sitting in a cloud, and pulled out her aviation weather patterns textbook. 30 minutes until takeoff. Might as well study. 25 minutes. That's all the piece she got. The commotion started before Amora even saw her. That particular sound of expensive heels on aircraft flooring, sharp, deliberate, entitled. Chloe Richardson had the kind of presence that demanded attention, and she knew it. Blonde hair that cost more to maintain than most people's rent. A designer bag that could pay for a semester of college. The kind of woman who'd never heard the word no, and considered it a personal insult when she did. Excuse me. Amora looked up from her textbook. The woman standing in the aisle looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine, if fashion magazines featured people whose faces were twisted with barely contained rage. You're in my seat. It wasn't a question. Amora glanced at her boarding pass again, a nervous habit she'd developed today. I'm sorry, but this is 2A. That's my seat. Chloe's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. Sweetheart, there's obviously been some kind of mistake. This is first class. The word sweetheart dripped with so much condescension that nearby passengers began to take notice. A businessman in 3B lowered his Wall Street Journal. A mother traveling with her teenage daughter in row 1 turned slightly in her seat. I have a first-class ticket, Amora said quietly, holding up her boarding pass. Her hand was steady, but her heart was racing. She'd dealt with this before, the surprised looks when she'd walked into advanced engineering classes, the double takes when she mentioned her major, but never quite like this. Chloe didn't even glance at the boarding pass. Listen, I fly this route every week. I know how these things work. Sometimes the airline oversells, and they upgrade people who. She paused, her eyes traveling from Amora's braided hair to her college sweatshirt, people who don't usually sit up here. I'm sure if you just go back to economy where you belong, they'll sort this all out. Where you belong. The words hung in the air like a challenge. I paid for this seat, Amora said, though that wasn't entirely true. Her father had paid for it, but Chloe didn't need to know that. Paid for it? Chloe's voice rose an octave. You paid for a first-class ticket. Now everyone was watching. In 4A, a teenager had his phone out, subtle but recording. The flight attendant, Jennifer, who'd been doing final cabin checks, hurried over. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with the kind of fixed smile that suggested she'd dealt with difficult passengers before, but perhaps never quite like this. Ladies, is everything all right here? No, everything is not all right, Chloe snapped. This girl is in my seat. Jennifer maintained her professional composure. May I see both of your boarding passes, please? Amora handed hers over immediately. Chloe made a production of digging through her designer bag, sighing dramatically as if this entire situation was beneath her. She finally produced her boarding pass with a flourish. Jennifer examined both carefully. She said to Chloe, "You're in 2C. That's across the aisle. This young lady is correctly seated in 2A. For a moment, Chloe just stared at the flight attendant as if she'd spoken in tongues. Then her face flushed red. That's impossible. I specifically booked 2A. I always book 2A. I'm sorry for the confusion, but according to our system and these boarding passes, 2C is your assigned seat. Chloe's voice grew louder. I don't care what your system says. I've been a platinum member for 8 years. I spend more on flights annually than this girl probably sees in a lifetime. There is no way she legitimately has that seat. The cabin had gone completely quiet now. Everyone was watching, and at least 3 people were openly recording. Amora could feel every eye on her, could sense the other passengers trying to decide whose side to take. She wanted to disappear, to shrink into the leather seat, to avoid confrontation the way her mother had taught her. But then she remembered something else, not her mother's voice, but her father's, from one of their rare phone calls. Never let anyone make you feel small for sitting where you've earned to be. She hadn't earned this seat, not really. But maybe that wasn't the point. Jennifer tried again. I need you to take your assigned seat so we can prepare for departure. Get me your supervisor, Chloe demanded. Better yet, get me the gate agent. There's been a mistake, and I'm not moving until it's corrected. Jennifer's smile was starting to crack. You're not in your assigned seat. You're the one who needs to move. I'm not sitting in economy while she sits here. Chloe pointed at Amora like she was identifying a criminal in a lineup. Look at her. She's what, 18? Wearing a college sweatshirt? You really expect me to believe she paid $2,000 for a first-class ticket? The number hung in the air. $2,000. Amora hadn't known that's what her father had spent. The knowledge made her feel simultaneously grateful and guilty. Her age and appearance have nothing to do with her ticket validity, Jennifer said, and there was steel in her voice now. Oh, please, Chloe scoffed. We all know what's happening here. Some computer glitch or affirmative action upgrade program, and now I'm supposed to just accept it. The words landed like a slap. Several passengers gasped. The teenager with the phone moved to get a better angle. The businessman in 3B had completely abandoned his newspaper. Amora felt something shift inside her chest. The nervousness crystallized into something harder, more resolute. She stood up, all 5 feet 6 inches of her, and looked Chloe directly in the eye. I have a valid ticket for this seat, she said, her voice carrying through the cabin. I'm not moving. Chloe's face contorted with rage. You little. Jennifer stepped between them. I need you to calm down immediately, or I'll have to ask security to escort you off the plane. Security? You're threatening me with security? Do you have any idea who I am? No, and respectfully, it doesn't matter. You're creating a disturbance and refusing to comply with crew member instructions. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. Flight attendants, please prepare for possible delay. Jennifer picked up the cabin phone, speaking quietly but urgently. Amora caught fragments. Disruptive passenger, refusing to sit, mentioned race. Chloe was pacing now, as much as one could pace in the narrow aisle of a plane. This is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. I want every one of your names. I want the customer service number. I want. The captain has been informed of the situation, Jennifer said. You need to make a decision right now. Take your assigned seat in 2C or D plane. Those are your only options. The entire cabin seemed to hold its breath. Chloe looked around, perhaps expecting support, but found only cold stares and recording phones. The mother in first class shook her head disapprovingly. The businessman had actually turned in his seat to watch. This is discrimination, Chloe said, though the irony seemed lost on her. Discrimination against loyal customers in favor of. Say it, Amora said quietly. Go ahead and say what you really mean. Chloe's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Behind her, more flight attendants had appeared, along with what looked like a gate supervisor. Miss Williams, the supervisor said, and Amora's heart stopped. How did he know her name? Are you all right? I'm fine, she managed. The supervisor turned to Chloe. I'm going to have to ask you to come with me. I'm not going anywhere until this is resolved properly. The supervisor's phone buzzed. He looked at it, his eyes widening slightly. Excuse me one moment. He stepped back, speaking urgently into his phone. Amora caught a few words that made her blood run cold. Yes, sir. Williams, yes, immediately, sir. Oh no. Oh no no no. The supervisor returned, his entire demeanor changed. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to need everyone to remain seated. We have a situation that needs to be addressed. Chloe smirked, apparently thinking this meant she'd won. Finally, someone with sense. But the supervisor wasn't looking at Chloe. He was looking at Amora with something that might have been sympathy or might have been panic. Miss Williams, would you prefer to? She's staying exactly where she is. The voice came from the front of the plane. Male, authoritative, and terrifyingly familiar. Amora's stomach dropped as Richard Williams stepped into the first-class cabin. If you're enjoying this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button because what happens next will absolutely blow your mind. Richard Williams commanded attention without trying. 6 feet 2 inches of carefully controlled power in a custom-tailored suit. He was the kind of black man who'd fought for every inch of respect he commanded, and it showed in the way he carried himself, spine straight, shoulders back, eyes that had seen every type of discrimination Chloe was dishing out and had decided long ago to build something too big to be ignored. The cabin fell absolutely silent. Even the ambient plane noises seemed to fade. Several passengers recognized him immediately. His face had been in Forbes, The Wall Street Journal, on CNN discussing the future of aviation. The teenager with the phone nearly dropped it in shock. Mr. Williams, the supervisor stammered. Sir, we were just... Richard held up a hand, and the supervisor fell silent. His eyes swept the cabin, taking in the recording phones, the shocked faces, and finally landing on Chloe, who had gone very, very pale. I understand there's been some confusion about seating arrangements, he said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made people lean in to listen. Let me clear that up. The young lady in 2A has every right to be there. Her ticket was purchased legitimately, at full price, through proper channels. Chloe's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Richard continued, what I find interesting is that someone would assume otherwise based solely on her appearance. Even more interesting that this assumption would be voiced so loudly, so publicly, and with such conviction. He pulled out his phone, swiping to something before holding it up. The miracle of modern technology, your confrontation has already been viewed 4,000 to 7,000 times in the past 6 minutes. Would you like to know what the comments are saying? Chloe's face had gone from pale to green. Mr. Williams, she started, her voice barely a whisper. I wasn't. You weren't what? Richard's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. You weren't making assumptions based on race? You weren't publicly humiliating a young woman who had done nothing wrong? You weren't creating a hostile environment on my airline? The last 2 words hung in the air like a thunderclap. My airline. The businessman in 3B actually gasped. The mother in first class covered her mouth. The teenager with the phone was recording so intently he'd forgotten to blink. Your airline? Chloe's voice cracked. Williams Aviation. Perhaps you've heard of it? You mentioned being a platinum member for 8 years. That means you've been flying with my company since shortly after I founded it. In all that time, did you never wonder about the name? Chloe looked like she might faint. Her eyes darted between Richard and Amora could see the exact moment the connection clicked. She's your daughter. Yes. Amora Williams. Freshman at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, studying to become a pilot. Top of her class in aviation meteorology, by the way. Not that any of that should matter. She could be anybody's daughter, or nobody's daughter, and she'd still deserve to sit in the seat she paid for without being harassed. Amora wanted to disappear entirely. This was worse than the confrontation, worse than the assumptions. Everyone was staring at her now with new eyes, not just as a young black woman in first class, but as the secret daughter of a millionaire airline owner. She could feel their judgment shifting, recalculating, and she hated it. "Dad," she said quietly. "Please." Richard's expression softened for just a moment as he looked at her. "You okay, Butterfly?" The childhood nickname made her eyes sting with unexpected tears. She nodded, not trusting her voice. He turned back to Chloe. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to gather your belongings and leave my plane. Security will escort you out. You'll be refunded for this flight, but your platinum membership is terminated effective immediately. You're banned from Williams Aviation for life." You can't do that." "I can, and I am. My company has a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination. It's posted on our website, included in our terms of service, and announced at the beginning of every flight. You agreed to it when you purchased your ticket." Jennifer stepped forward with Chloe's carry-on, which she'd apparently retrieved from 2C. "Security is waiting on the jet bridge." Chloe looked around wildly, seeking support that wasn't coming. The other passengers were either recording or deliberately looking away. She grabbed her bag and started toward the exit, then turned back. "This is a mistake. I'll sue." "You'll what?" Richard asked calmly. "Sue me for enforcing my company's anti-discrimination policy? Please do. My legal team could use the entertainment. Although I should mention that the video of your behavior has now been viewed." He checked his phone 93,000 times. "Might affect your case." 2 security officers appeared in the doorway. Chloe walked toward them, her designer heels clicking against the floor with none of their earlier authority. Just before she left, she turned one more time. "I'm sorry," she said, though it was unclear if she meant it or was just trying to salvage something from the situation. "Apologize to her," Richard said, nodding toward Amora. "Not to me." Chloe's eyes met Amora's for a brief moment. "I'm sorry," she repeated, barely audible. Then she was gone. The cabin erupted in scattered applause. Someone actually shouted, "Thank you." Richard held up his hand again, and silence returned. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the delay and the disturbance. The actions you witnessed don't represent the values of Williams Aviation. We believe air travel should be accessible, comfortable, and dignified for everyone, regardless of race, age, or background. Today's incident will be reviewed thoroughly, and additional training will be implemented to ensure our crew is even better equipped to handle such situations." He looked directly at Jennifer. "You handled that professionally and by the book. Thank you." Jennifer looked like she might cry from relief. "As for the delay," Richard continued, "everyone on this flight will receive a travel voucher for 50% off their next booking with us. It's the least we can do for your patience." More applause, genuine this time. Richard made his way to Amora's row and, to her surprise, sat down in 2B, the middle seat nobody ever wanted. "Dad, what are you doing?" "Flying to Atlanta. I was heading there anyway for a board meeting. Figured I'd take an earlier flight." "You just happened to be here?" He smiled, and for a moment, she saw the father she remembered from before the divorce. "I might have been tracking your flight. First time in first class and all. Wanted to make sure everything went smoothly." "This is not smooth." "No," he agreed. "But you handled it well. You stood your ground with dignity. I'm proud of you." The words she'd waited years to hear, and they came in the middle of the worst day she'd had in months. "This is going to be everywhere," she said quietly. "Everyone at school will know. They'll all know who my father is, who you are. Is that such a bad thing? I wanted to earn my place. Not have it handed to me because of my last name." Richard was quiet for a moment. Around them, the flight attendants were preparing for departure, but they were giving the Williams family a wide berth. "Amora, can I tell you something? When I started this airline, nobody wanted to invest in a black-owned aviation company. I heard every excuse, every coded rejection. Too risky. Too ambitious. Too urban, that was my favorite, as if planes only flew over suburbs. I had to work twice as hard for half the recognition, and even then, people assumed I was a front, that there had to be white investors behind me pulling the strings. She'd never heard this story before. The thing is, Butterfly, you can't earn your way out of other people's assumptions. That woman would have made the same judgments if your last name was Smith or Johnson or anything else. She saw your skin color and your age and decided you didn't belong. That had nothing to do with me and everything to do with her limited worldview. But now everyone will think I'm only in aviation school because of you. Are you? No. I love it. I've loved planes since I used to take you to watch them land at the airport when you were 5. I remember. Amora looked at him in surprise. You remember that? I remember everything, Butterfly. Every science fair, every report card your mother sent me, every achievement. I may not have been there, but I was paying attention. The captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we're now ready for departure. Flight attendants, please prepare for takeoff. Richard buckled his seatbelt. You know what the irony is? That woman, Chloe, her maiden name is Richardson. Richardson Automotive. Her father owns the third largest car dealership chain in the Northeast. She's never worked a day in her life, just lived off Daddy's money. But she had the audacity to question whether you deserve to be here. How do you know all that? I make it my business to know who flies with my airline. Especially the ones who spend a lot of money. She dropped $50,000 on flights last year, all first class, all paid for by her trust fund. The plane began to push back from the gate. Outside the window, ground crews directed the aircraft with glowing wands. Amora watched them, thinking about her classes, about the systems she was learning, about the future she was building. Dad? Yeah. Thank you. For standing up for me. For being here. I should have been doing it all along. They sat in silence as the plane taxied to the runway. The teenager who'd been recording earlier leaned forward from 3A. Excuse me, Mr. Williams? I just wanted to say that was amazing. What you did. My little sister is 13, and she wants to be an engineer, but she's the only black girl in her advanced math class. I'm definitely showing her this video. Richard smiled. Tell your sister that the only person who gets to decide where she belongs is her. And if anyone says otherwise, she should remember that their limitations aren't her responsibility. The plane turned onto the runway, engines spinning up. Amora felt the familiar press of acceleration, the moment when physics overcame gravity, when tons of metal somehow found a way to fly. She'd studied the science, understood the principles, but it still felt like magic. As they climbed into the sky, leaving New York behind, her phone buzzed with notifications. The video had gone properly viral now. Her college friends were texting frantically. Her mother had called 6 times. But there was one message that made her smile, from her study group. Yo, Amora's dad is a boss. Also, study session still on for tonight? Normal. They were treating her normally. Maybe this would be okay. Dad. HM. That woman, Chloe. Do you think she really learned anything? Richard considered this. Honestly? Probably not. People like that rarely do. She'll convince herself she was the victim, that we overreacted, that it wasn't about race. But that's not the point. Then what is? The point is everyone else on this plane. The teenager who's going to show his sister that video. The other passengers who might speak up next time they see something like this happening. The flight attendants who now know their company will back them up when they do the right thing. Change doesn't come from converting the Chloes of the world. It comes from empowering everyone else to stop tolerating them. The plane reached cruising altitude. Below them, the clouds looked like a sea of cotton, stretching endlessly toward the horizon. Amora pulled out her aviation weather patterns textbook again, but couldn't focus on it. Too much had happened. Too much was still happening. You know this is going to follow me forever, right? First black female pilot whose daddy owns the airline. They'll never let me forget it. Maybe not. But here's the thing, Butterfly, you were always going to be the first something. First black female pilot at some airline. First black female captain on some route. First black female chief pilot somewhere. The world's going to put labels on you no matter what. At least this way, you know the owners got your back. Despite everything, Amora laughed. That's your pitch? Nepotism as a defense against racism. Hey, white people have been doing it for centuries. About time we got in on the action. The flight attendant, not Jennifer, but an older woman with kind eyes, approached with the service cart. Can I offer you both something to drink? Coffee, black, Richard said. Orange juice, please, Amora requested. As the flight attendant poured their drinks, she leaned in slightly. I've been flying for 20 years, she said quietly. That was the best thing I've ever seen happen on a plane. Thank you. After she moved on, Richard raised his coffee cup. To standing your ground. Amora clinked her plastic cup against his. To showing up. Even if it's years late. Ouch. Fair, but ouch. They flew in comfortable silence for a while. Amora finally managed to read a few pages of her textbook, occasionally pointing out interesting weather formations outside the window. Richard listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he actually understood what she was studying. You really do keep track of my grades, she said, surprised. Your atmospheric physics professor sends very detailed progress reports. Professor Martinez? He barely knows I exist. He knows exactly who you are. Just respects you enough not to make a big deal about it. Unlike some people, he judges students based on their work, not their connections. Before Amora could respond, Richard's phone buzzed. He looked at it and sighed. The media requests are starting. CNN, Fox, MSNBC, even the BBC. Everyone wants an interview. Are you going to do them? No. But you might want to consider it. Me? Why would I? Because you're the one studying aviation. You're the one building a career. You're the one whose classmates need to see that you're more than just my daughter. Tell your story, in your words, on your terms. Control the narrative before it controls you. It was good advice, even if the thought of being on television made her want to throw up. What would I even say? The truth. That you're a student who loves aviation. That you were sitting in a seat you had every right to occupy. That what happened to you happens to people every day who don't have CEO fathers to defend them. Make it bigger than just you. By the time they landed in Atlanta, the video had been viewed over 1 million times. #Flying While Black was trending. 3 major news outlets had published think pieces about discrimination in air travel. Chloe Richardson had deleted all her social media accounts, though screenshots of her previous posts, many of them tone-deaf at best, openly racist at worst, were circulating widely. As they deplaned, passengers kept stopping them. Handshakes for Richard, words of encouragement for Amora. The teenager with the phone got a selfie. The mother traveling with her daughter made a point of telling Amora that she was setting a good example. In the gate area, Richard turned to her. I have a car waiting. Can I give you a ride to campus? I can take the shuttle. I know you can. That wasn't the question. Amora considered it. Part of her wanted to maintain the independence she'd fought so hard for. But a larger part realized that maybe accepting help wasn't the same as being helpless. Okay. But I'm picking the music. Deal. But if it's that stuff you were listening to in high school. Dad, that was 5 years ago. Fair point. As they walked through the airport together, Amora noticed something different. People were looking at them. She was used to that in airports. A young black woman often drew stares, but now they were looking with recognition, with respect. A few people even applauded. This is weird, she muttered. Get used to it. You're probably going to be famous for a while. Great. Just what every college student wants. In the car, a sleek black SUV with a driver who called Richard Mr. W., Amora finally checked her phone properly. Hundreds of messages. Her mother had sent a novel-length text that started with, "Baby, are you okay?" and ended with, "I'm going to have words with your father about putting you through this." Mom's mad at you. Your mother's been mad at me for 12 years. I'm used to it. She says you shouldn't have made it public. I didn't. Chloe did when she decided to have her meltdown in front of 40 recording phones. They drove through Atlanta traffic, the city skyline glittering in the afternoon sun. Amora's campus was still an hour away, plenty of time to think. Dad, can I ask you something? Anything. Why didn't you fight harder? For custody, I mean. After the divorce. Richard was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he sighed. Your mother said I was choosing the airline over you. She wasn't entirely wrong. Starting this company, it consumed me. 18-hour days, 7 days a week. Fighting against every stereotype, every closed door. I told myself I was doing it for you, building something you could be proud of, something you could inherit. But the truth is, I was also doing it for me. To prove something. And by the time I realized what I'd missed, you were already 10, 11, 12. You had your life, your friends, your routine. Disrupting all that just so I could feel better about myself seemed selfish. But you could have visited more. I could have. I should have. I was scared, honestly. Scared you'd reject me. Scared I wouldn't know how to be a father anymore. Scared of failing you even more than I already had. Stupid, I know. Yeah, it was. He laughed, short and rueful. You definitely got your honesty from your mother. I got my stubbornness from you, though. Is that what we're calling it? I prefer determination. They were approaching campus now. Embry-Riddle's buildings came into view, the aircraft on display outside the aviation building gleaming in the sun. Home, or what had become home in the past few months. You want to know what I really think? Amora asked. Always. I think Chloe did us both a favor. If this hadn't happened, we might have gone another 5 years barely talking. You showing up today, standing up for me, it doesn't fix everything. But it's a start. I'll take a start. The driver pulled up outside her dorm. Richard got out with her, helped her with her bag. They stood there awkwardly for a moment, two people who shared DNA but not much history, trying to figure out how to say goodbye. There's going to be more of this, Richard said. More Chloes. More people who think you don't belong. In aviation, in first class, in boardrooms, in cockpits. You know that, right? I know. And you're going to keep going anyway. Of course. Someone's got to fly your planes when you retire. He laughed, real and warm. That's my girl. He hugged her then, quick but genuine. Call me. Not just when things go wrong. Call me when you ace a test, when you have a bad day, when you see a cool cloud formation. Just call. I will. As the SUV pulled away, Amora stood outside her dorm, watching it disappear. Her phone was still buzzing with notifications, the video still spreading across the internet like wildfire. Tomorrow there would be interviews to navigate, classes where everyone would stare, conversations about privilege and prejudice and all the complicated places where they intersected. But tonight, she had a study group to attend. Friends who would treat her the same as they had yesterday. Weather patterns to memorize, flight systems to understand, a future to build one lesson at a time. She walked into her dorm, past the common room where someone had the news on. Her face flashed across the screen, a clip from the video where she stood up to Chloe. The headline read, Airline CEO's daughter faces discrimination on father's own plane. Hey, Amora, one of her dormmates called out. You're famous. For like 15 minutes, she called back. Better than nothing. In her room, she dropped her bag and sat at her desk. Her aviation weather patterns textbook was still bookmarked from the plane. She opened it, trying to find where she'd left off, when her phone rang. Her mother. Hi, Mom. Don't you hi? Are you okay? Really okay? And don't lie. I'm okay. It was awful, but I'm okay. I saw the video. That woman, the things she said. I know. Your father shouldn't have made such a spectacle. He was defending me. He was grandstanding. Mom. A sigh from the other end. You're right. I'm sorry. I'm angry. Angry that you had to go through that. Angry that I wasn't there. Angry that after all this time, all this progress, people still. I know. Are you going to do the interviews? I don't know. Maybe. Dad thinks I should. Well, that's the first smart thing your father said in 12 years. Mom. I'm kidding. Mostly. Look, baby, if you do them, don't let them turn you into a symbol. You're a person, not a cause. You're allowed to be upset, allowed to be angry, allowed to not have all the answers. I don't have any answers. Good. Anyone who claims to have all the answers about racism in America is selling something. They talked for another 20 minutes, about school, about the weather, literally, for her class, about everything except what had happened for most of it. It was what Amora needed, that normalcy, that reminder that she was more than this one moment. After they hung up, she opened her laptop. The video was everywhere. News sites, social media, blogs. The comments ranged from supportive to horrifying, with the usual internet chaos in between. But one article caught her eye, an op-ed in the aviation trade publication she read regularly. "The future of aviation looks like Amora Williams," the headline read. She almost didn't click on it, but curiosity won. The author, a black female pilot for Delta, wrote about her own experiences, about the countless times she'd been mistaken for a flight attendant, about passengers who refused to believe she was the captain, about the slow, grinding work of changing an industry one flight at a time. "What struck me about the video," the pilot wrote, "wasn't the bigotry. We've all faced that. It was the quiet dignity of a 19-year-old student who stood her ground. Who didn't yell, didn't make a scene, just insisted on her right to exist in that space. That's the generation that will change aviation. Not through grand gestures or viral moments, but through the simple, radical act of refusing to be moved." Amora read it twice, then saved it to her laptop. Maybe she would do the interviews. Maybe she'd tell her story, not as the airline CEO's daughter, but as herself. A student. A future pilot. A young black woman who'd sat in first class and refused to be moved. Her study group text thread was going crazy. "Amora, you're literally on every news channel. Can we study at your place? Mine's too loud. Bring snacks if you come. Jake ate everything again. Are we going to talk about the fact that Amora's dad is basically aviation royalty? No, we're going to talk about atmospheric pressure patterns because we have a test. But after, can we talk about it? After." She smiled, grabbed her textbook and notes, and headed out. Down the hall, past rooms where her classmates were probably watching her video, discussing what had happened, forming opinions about who she really was. Let them, she thought. Tomorrow she'd deal with being a symbol, with representing something bigger than herself. Tonight, she was just a student with a meteorology exam to study for. Here's a question for you watching. Have you ever stood your ground in a situation where someone tried to make you feel like you didn't belong? Drop your story in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you handled it. 3 hours into the study session, when they'd finally finished with cloud formations and moved on to pressure systems, Jake finally asked the question everyone had been thinking. "So, your dad really owns an airline?" "Yeah. And you never mentioned it because?" "Because I wanted you to know me, not my last name." "Fair," said Teresa, highlighting something in her textbook. "Though it would have been nice to know before I complained about Williams Aviation's snack selection for 20 minutes last week." Everyone laughed, and just like that, the tension broke. They were just college kids again, stressed about exams and deadlines and whether the cafeteria would have decent food tomorrow. "Is it weird?" asked Marcus. "Knowing everyone's going to look at you differently now?" Amora considered this. "You know what's weird? Everyone always looked at me differently. They just have a new reason now. Before, I was the black girl in advanced classes. Now I'm the black girl with the rich dad. Either way, I'm still the black girl who has to prove she belongs here." "That's messed up," said Jake. "That's life," Amora replied. "But here's the thing, I do belong here. I belong in those advanced classes because I study my ass off. I belonged in that first-class seat because I had a ticket. And I'll belong in a cockpit someday because I'll earn my license. What other people think about it doesn't change any of that." Teresa raised her energy drink in a toast. "To belonging wherever the hell we want." They clinked cans and bottles, then went back to studying. Outside, planes from the nearby airport passed overhead, their lights blinking in the darkness. each one following its flight path, carrying hundreds of people to hundreds of destinations, piloted by people who'd once sat in dorm rooms just like this one, studying weather patterns and wondering if they'd make it. Amora's phone lit up with another call from a news outlet. She declined it, put her phone on silent, and focused on her notes. There would be time for all of that tomorrow. Tonight, she had work to do. The exam was at 8 in the morning. By 7:30, Amora had already received 36 texts, 200 new Instagram followers, and an email from the university president expressing support and asking if she needed any resources. She didn't respond to any of it. She had a test to take. Walking across campus, she noticed the looks more than usual. Some people smiled, others whispered to their friends, a few gave her thumbs up. One guy actually applauded, which was weird enough that she sped up to get away from him. In the examination room, Professor Martinez was arranging papers on his desk. He looked up when she entered, his expression neutral as always. "Miss Williams. Ready for the exam?" "Yes, sir." "Good. I don't care if you're famous now. You still need to pass." And that was exactly what she needed to hear. For the next 90 minutes, she wasn't the girl from the viral video or the airline CEO's daughter. She was just a student, answering questions about atmospheric pressure, cloud formations, and weather prediction models. The familiar scratch of pencil on paper, the quiet concentration of test-taking, the normal pressure of academic life. She finished with 10 minutes to spare, reviewed her answers twice, then handed in her paper. Professor Martinez took it without comment, but as she was leaving, he said quietly, "Your answer on convective systems was particularly well-reasoned. Keep it up." Coming from him, that was practically a parade. Outside the classroom, reality reasserted itself. Her phone had blown up during the exam. 4 to 7 missed calls, most from numbers she didn't recognize. Her mother had texted, "ABC News called me." The actual news. But there was one message that made her pause. It was from an unknown number, but the area code was familiar. It was from her hometown. "Hi Amora, you don't know me, but my daughter goes to your old high school. She's the only black girl in AP Physics. She watched your video this morning and decided not to drop the class like she'd been planning. Thank you for showing her it's okay to stay where you belong. Sarah's mom." Amora stood in the hallway, reading the message 3 times. This was bigger than her, bigger than one confrontation on one plane. Every young black girl who'd been told she didn't belong somewhere was watching, waiting to see what happened next. Her phone rang. CNN this time. She almost declined, then remembered her father's words, "Control the narrative before it controls you." "Hello. Miss Williams? This is Patricia Chen from CNN. We'd love to have you on tonight to discuss your experience and what it means for discrimination in air travel. Can I bring someone with me?" "Of course. Your father?" "No. Another student pilot. Someone who can speak to what it's really like for people who don't have CEO fathers to protect them." There was a pause. "That's actually a great angle." "Yes, absolutely." "Then I'll do it." She spent the rest of the day preparing. Not just for the interview, but for what would come after. She called Teresa, who'd shared stories about being mistaken for cleaning staff at aviation conferences. She spoke with Marcus, who'd been told by a flight instructor that people like him rarely made it past private pilot licenses. She gathered their stories, their experiences, their perspectives. That evening, in the CNN studio in Atlanta, sitting across from a news anchor she'd watched since middle school, Amora didn't feel like a 19-year-old college student. She felt like a representative, a voice for everyone who'd ever been made to feel small in spaces they'd earned the right to occupy. "Amora, let's start with what happened. Can you walk us through your experience?" And she did. Calmly, clearly, without exaggeration or dramatics. Just the facts of what had occurred. "Your father's intervention has been both praised and criticized. Some say he turned a teaching moment into a spectacle. How do you respond?" "My father did what any parent would do, he protected his child. The fact that he owns the airline made his protection more visible, but it doesn't make it less valid. What about all the parents who can't protect their children from this kind of discrimination? What about the people who face this alone?" That's why you brought Teresa with you tonight. Yes. Amora turned to her friend. Teresa's been flying since she was 16. She's one of the best pilots in our program. But she can't count the number of times she's been questioned, doubted, or dismissed. My story went viral because of who my father is. But Teresa's story, and thousands like hers, happen every day without any cameras rolling. Teresa spoke then, her voice steady and powerful, about her own experiences. About the instructor who told her to consider a different career. About the passengers who assumed she was lost when she walked toward the cockpit. About the constant, exhausting work of proving herself over and over again. The thing is, Teresa said, Amora having a famous father doesn't make her experience less valid. It just makes it more visible. We should be asking why it takes a CEO's daughter facing discrimination for people to pay attention to what we've been saying all along. The interview went on for 20 minutes, but those words, Teresa's words, were what made the headlines. Not Amora's famous father or the viral confrontation, but the simple truth that discrimination in aviation was bigger than one incident. After the interview, as they were leaving the studio, Amora's phone rang. Her father. Watched the interview. You did good, butterfly. Teresa did most of the talking. That was the point, wasn't it? To make it bigger than just you. Yeah. Proud of you. Also, Chloe's lawyer called. She wants to settle out of court for the ban reversal. What did you say? I said she could fly with any other airline she wants. The ban stands. That seems harsh. Does it? She traumatized you, embarrassed herself, and turned my airline into a circus. Actions have consequences. If she'd apologized sincerely, maybe. But her lawyer's letter called it a misunderstanding. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was racism, plain and simple. After they hung up, Amora and Teresa grabbed late-night food at a 24-hour diner near campus. They sat in a corner booth, exhausted from the day, picking at fries and drinking milkshakes. This is going to follow you forever, Teresa said. You know that, right? Yeah. But maybe that's okay. Maybe it needs to follow me. Maybe when I'm a captain someday, some young girl will see me and think, if she could handle all that and still make it, so can I. Captain Williams. Has a nice ring to it. Captain Williams of Williams Aviation is a bit much, don't you think? Then fly for someone else. Prove you can make it anywhere. It was a good point. Maybe she wouldn't fly for her father's airline. Maybe she'd make her own way, build her own reputation. Or maybe she would fly for Williams Aviation and transform it from the inside, make it a place where no one would ever again question whether a passenger belonged in their seat. The news cycle moved on, as news cycles do. Within a week, there was another scandal, another viral video, another main character of the internet. But the impact of what had happened lingered. Williams Aviation announced a new scholarship program for minority aviation students, funded partially by the money they would have made from Chloe Richardson's lifetime of flights. They implemented additional anti-discrimination training for all staff, not just flight crews. They created a passenger advocacy position, someone whose specific job was to handle discrimination complaints. Other airlines followed suit, not wanting to be the next viral video. It wasn't systematic change, not yet, but it was a start. Amora went back to her life. Classes, study groups, flight simulations. She did a few more interviews, always bringing another student with her, always making it about more than just her story. She became, reluctantly, a sort of spokesperson for young black women in aviation. It wasn't a role she'd wanted, but it was one she grew into. Her relationship with her father evolved slowly. He called more often, visited when he could. They talked about aviation, about business, about the challenges of changing an industry from the inside. He shared stories of his early days, the struggles he'd faced, the doors he'd had to break down. She shared her dreams, her fears, her determination to be more than just the CEO's daughter. 3 months after the incident, Amora was back at the airport, heading home for spring break. She was flying Williams Aviation, of course. Free family flights were one perk she wasn't too proud to use. As she boarded, the flight attendant recognized her immediately. Miss Williams. It's an honor. You're in 2A again today. Amora smiled. Thank you, but any seat is fine. Nonsense. You've earned that seat. As she settled in, pulling out her textbook, aerodynamics this time, a young black girl, maybe 13 or 14, stopped in the aisle. Excuse me, are you Amora Williams? I am. My mom showed me your video. I'm starting flight lessons next month because of you. That's amazing. What's your name? Destiny. Well, Destiny, let me tell you something. There are going to be people who tell you that you don't belong in a cockpit. They're wrong. You belong anywhere you work hard enough to be. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. The girl beamed and took her seat a few rows back. Amora caught her stealing glances throughout the flight, and when they landed, she made sure to give her email address. Send me updates on your lessons, she said. I want to hear how you're doing. Walking through the airport, Amora reflected on how much had changed in 3 months. She was the same person, same grades, same goals, same dreams. But now she carried something extra. The weight of representation, the responsibility of visibility. It was heavy sometimes, but it was also powerful. Her phone buzzed. A text from her dad, heard you inspired another future pilot today. The flight attendant called me. Do all your employees report on me now? Only the good stuff. How's aerodynamics going? Kicking my butt, but I'll survive. That's my girl. 6 months after the incident, Amora stood in front of a room full of high school students at an aviation summer camp. They were all minorities, all interested in flying, all facing the same battles she was fighting. She was supposed to give a motivational speech, but looking at their eager faces, she decided to tell the truth instead. You've probably seen the video, she started. You probably think I'm here to tell you that standing up to racism is easy, that if you just believe in yourself, everything will work out. I'm not going to tell you that. Standing up is hard. It's exhausting. And sometimes, even when you're right, even when you win, it still hurts. The room was silent, hanging on every word. But here's what I will tell you. You belong in every cockpit, every boardroom, every first-class cabin you earn your way into. Not because of who your parents are or aren't, not because of quotas or diversity programs, but because you have the same right to dream big as anyone else. The same right to fly. She talked for an hour, answered questions for another. One boy asked if she regretted that the video went viral. No, she said after thinking about it. I regret that it had to happen at all. But I don't regret that people saw it. Sometimes the world needs to see its ugliness reflected back at it. That's the only way things change. A girl in the back raised her hand. Do you think things are actually changing? I think we're forcing them to. Every time one of us refuses to be moved, refuses to be diminished, refuses to accept that's just how things are, we force a little bit of change. It's not enough, not yet, but it's something. After the talk, the camp director, a black woman who'd been flying commercially for 20 years, pulled her aside. I wish someone had told me what you just told them when I was their age. That it's okay to acknowledge that it's hard. I spent so many years pretending it wasn't, trying to be strong all the time. Did it get easier? No. But I got stronger. And now, watching kids like you, knowing you won't have to fight alone the way I did, that makes it worthwhile. A year passed. Amora progressed through her program, each semester bringing new challenges, new triumphs. She did her first solo flight on a clear Tuesday morning, the sky so blue it looked painted. As she lifted off, alone in the cockpit for the first time, she thought about Chloe Richardson, wondered if she ever thought about that day on the plane. She'd heard through her father that Chloe had tried to rehabilitate her image, had made donations to diversity programs, had issued multiple apologies. But she'd never reached out directly, never made a personal apology. Amora didn't need it anymore. That confrontation had stopped being about Chloe a long time ago. It was about Destiny, who sent monthly updates about her flight lessons. It was about the countless young people who messaged her, saying her story had inspired them to pursue aviation or stand up for themselves or simply believe they belonged. It was about the slow, necessary work of change. 2 years after the incident, Amora received her commercial pilot's license. The examiner who administered her test was a gruff older man who barely smiled the entire time. But after she'd completed every maneuver flawlessly, he shook her hand and said, "I know who you are. I saw the video. For what it's worth, you fly a hell of a lot better than you stand up to racists, and you did that pretty well too." Her father was there for the celebration, along with her mother, who had finally stopped giving Richard grief about the viral video. They stood together, not quite a family but something approaching it, watching as Amora received her license. "So," Richard said, "Williams Aviation is hiring. Just saying." "Dad. I know. You want to make your own way. But the offer's always open." "Actually," Amora said, surprising herself, "I've been thinking about it. Williams Aviation could use more pilots who understand what it's like to be questioned, to be doubted. Maybe I could help change things from the inside." "Is that what you want?" "I want to fly. Everything else is just details." 3 years after that day on the plane, Captain Amora Williams completed her first commercial flight as pilot in command. It was a short regional route, nothing glamorous, but it was hers. As she made the announcement, "This is your captain speaking," she thought about all the young black girls who would hear those words and know it was possible. The flight was uneventful, which in aviation is the highest compliment. After landing, as passengers disembarked, an older black woman stopped at the cockpit door. "Captain Williams? I just wanted to say thank you. My granddaughter is 12, and she wants to be a pilot. I'm going to tell her I flew with you today. Tell her she can do it. Tell her she belongs in this seat." "I will." As the woman left, Amora's co-pilot, a middle-aged white man named Bob who'd been nothing but professional the entire flight, turned to her. "That video of yours? I've got to admit, when I first saw it, I thought your dad overreacted. But my daughter showed me some of the comments, the things people were saying. Made me realize how much I don't see because I don't have to. Thanks for that wake-up call. Thanks for being willing to wake up." 5 years later, Amora had logged thousands of flight hours, had been promoted to flying international routes. She still got the occasional passenger who did a double-take when she walked into the cockpit, still faced the subtle and not-so-subtle questioning of her capabilities. But she also received letters from young pilots who'd been inspired by her story, who saw her success as proof that they could succeed too. The aviation industry hadn't transformed overnight. There were still too few black pilots, especially black female pilots. But the numbers were growing, slowly but steadily. Williams Aviation's scholarship program had funded dozens of students. Other airlines had implemented similar programs. It wasn't enough, but it was progress. On the 5th anniversary of the incident, a journalist reached out wanting to do a retrospective. Where was Chloe Richardson now? Had the two women ever reconciled? What did Amora think about how everything had played out? Amora declined the interview. That story had been told. She was more interested in the stories yet to come, the students she mentored, the barriers still to break, the flights yet to fly. But that evening, something unexpected happened. An email arrived from an address she didn't recognize. The subject line read, "5 years late. Dear Captain Williams, you don't know me, but 5 years ago, I was on that flight from New York to Atlanta. I was the teenager recording in 3A. I never posted my video, your story wasn't mine to tell, but I watched everything unfold, and I've followed your career since. I wanted you to know that watching you that day changed my life. Not in some dramatic way, but in a subtle, important one. I learned that dignity in the face of ignorance is its own form of resistance. I learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to move. I'm in law school now, planning to work in civil rights law. When people ask why, I tell them about you. About a 19-year-old who stood her ground at 30,000 feet and changed an industry's conversation about who belongs. Thank you for your courage that day. Thank you for continuing to fly, to inspire, to refuse to be moved. With admiration and respect, James Chen, future civil rights attorney inspired by Captain Amora Williams." Amora read the email 3 times, then saved it in a folder labeled "Why It Matters." The folder had hundreds of similar messages, each one a reminder that individual moments of courage ripple outward in ways we can't always see. She looked out her apartment window at the planes passing overhead, each one carrying hundreds of stories, hundreds of people going somewhere, being someone, belonging exactly where they were. Tomorrow she would fly again. There would be weather to navigate, passengers to transport safely, the endless beautiful complexity of keeping tons of metal aloft. There might be someone who questioned her presence in the cockpit. There might be a young girl who saw her and thought, I could do that too. Both possibilities were part of the job now, part of the legacy of that day 5 years ago when she'd sat in seat 2A and refused to move. Her phone buzzed. A text from her father, proud of you, butterfly. Always have been, always will be. She smiled, remembering the frightened 19-year-old who'd sat frozen in that first-class seat, wondering if she belonged there. That girl couldn't have imagined where she'd end up, couldn't have known that sometimes the worst moments become the most important ones. Thanks, Dad, she texted back. For everything. The sun was setting over Atlanta, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold. Somewhere, a young black girl was looking up at a passing plane, dreaming of flying. Somewhere, someone was being told they didn't belong. Somewhere, someone was refusing to accept that. And tomorrow, Captain Amora Williams would fly again, carrying with her not just passengers but the weight and wonder of representation, the responsibility and privilege of being exactly who she was, exactly where she belonged. The video of that day 5 years ago still circulated occasionally, usually during discussions about discrimination or during Black History Month. But Amora's story had become bigger than that single moment. It had become about persistence, about excellence, about the long journey between standing your ground and soaring above it. As she prepared for bed, her phone lit up with one more message. It was from Destiny, the girl from the plane 3 years ago. Captain Williams. I got accepted into Embry-Riddle. Starting this fall. Thank you for believing in me before I believed in myself. See you in the skies. Amora smiled, remembering her own acceptance letter, her own dreams, her own journey that had led through confrontation to triumph. She typed back. Congratulations, future Captain Destiny. Remember, you belong exactly where you're brave enough to go. See you in the skies indeed. 5 years after a woman named Chloe had tried to make her move, Amora Williams had found her place, not just in seat 2A, not just in the cockpit, but in the ongoing story of who gets to fly and who gets to decide where they belong. The answer, she'd learned, was simple: we all do. We all belong exactly where we're brave enough to stay, exactly where we're determined enough to fly, exactly where we refuse to be moved. And tomorrow, she would fly again.